Thank you everybody for coming tonight as well. I'm Megan, has been introduced, and I'm a former secondary English teacher and now work as a content writer and editor for Twinkl. And tonight we're going to be speaking about decolonising the curriculum. And to start off, I would really like to talk about why it is that we're doing this session, why I feel that we should be talking about this in our schools and in our communities. When we think about this topic, it is hugely important, and it's important to think about the deep-rooted inequalities in our society today and how they affect marginalised groups. As educators, we have an obligation and an opportunity to become social justice warriors, and it's our job to help teach our learners about bystanding, upstanding, and calls to action. It's really important for us to think about how we can teach our future generation and also how they can spread messages within society today about the importance of diversity and also inclusion. We should really address this often one-sided story, this Western white European perspective on global events. And it's our job to look through the lens of others to promote awareness of varied lived experiences and help our learners do so as well. It's not our only responsibility as educators, and I understand that our responsibilities grow every single day in the classroom and beyond. But we do have an opportunity to teach about acceptance. And for some learners in our care, this is the only time that they are going to get this opportunity to discuss such important topics. And it's our job to promote the idea of a global village across our schools and also our wider communities. The other thing I would like us to think about is the fact that a lot of our learners are faced with misinformation every single day, particularly online, and that can be very, very dangerous. We do have an obligation to create such safe spaces for learners, and we should be providing them with unbiased information. The point of the presentation today is not to tell you how to decolonise your curriculum, although we will look at some things that we can do with our curriculums and how we can start that process and that journey. But we should be thinking about discussions that we can have in our school community and how to create more inclusive environments in our classroom and out with the classroom as well. It's also an opportunity for us to reflect on what it is that we know already, what we can learn more about, and how we can use our positions as educators. And I'd also like to stress that it's not about being perfect and it's not about being the finished article. It's about taking these small steps, and these small steps can lead to great change, and they can also make all of our learners feel very safe and welcome. So I'd now like to move on, and I'd like to discuss what it is that we actually mean by decolonising the curriculum. For some of you here tonight, this might be the first event that you've been to about decolonising the curriculum. For some other guests tonight, this might be part of your journey that you already might be on. So we're going to cover a variety of things tonight. When we're thinking about this topic, we're talking about transforming education, and specifically in terms of equity, inclusivity, and about being honest as well. We want to consider how the curriculum includes the diverse needs of all of our learners, and we always want to think about this in a positive manner as well. We want to think about moving away from a one-sided story or the typical narrative that we often see in textbooks and in parts of our curriculum. And we want to think about embracing and also celebrating a variety of cultures, languages, and identities as well. We want to also be thinking about how we can include more rights-based learning in our practice, how we can ensure that we are delivering anti-racism education, and also how we're using learner voice in our practice as well. So I'm going to move on to some definitions now, and there will be quite a lot of information on these slides, and there will be main points as well that are highlighted in bold for you to take notes to. When we think about race, we are thinking about this in terms of a grouping of humans based on shared physical or social qualities into categories that are generally viewed as distinct by society. When we think about the term race that's so often used, we are thinking about it as a social construct. And it is an identity which is assigned based on rules that have been made by society. We're thinking about physical similarities within groups. Race is not an inherent physical or biological quality. This term has also been applied to groups that share language and religion. Because race is argued as being a social construct, it is a construct that is therefore designed to benefit white people. And therefore, this creates hierarchies within society. And when we consider the history of things like colonialism and enslavement, there is obviously great evidence to support this argument. When we are thinking about the term race, we are now actively encouraging our educators to use the term ethnicity. And the reason that we are doing that is because ethnicity is linked to identity and heritage, and it's based on more than just a hierarchy as well. When we think about colonialism, we're thinking about the expansion of empires. And during the expansion of empires, a lot of groups of people were deemed inferior to white people. This therefore meant that a lot of people felt that certain groups of people could only be civilized by white Westerners during this time. And this therefore allowed certain empires, such as the British Empire, to tell the colonial lie that colonialism was a policy that was meant for improving the lives of the people who lived in such places, but instead it actually exploited the land, the lives, and the intellectual minds of the people who lived there. And this is something that we're encouraging educators to embed within their practice, and it all feeds into this idea of racial literacy as well, that we should be encouraging our young people to understand more about. Much of these attitudes have then been passed down through generations, and they've actually influenced quite a lot of policies today. This social construction itself has actually created white privilege, and that is something that we can't hide from, and we have to discuss this with our learners, that actually being white means that you have advantages in a society that are categorised by racial inequalities and injustices that you may not even know that you have. So the fact that tonight that we can be here and that we can discuss these things shows a position that we are in, it shows our privilege, and we have to translate that message over to our learners and help them understand that they are also in a privileged position of being able to talk about these things and also change these things as well. I'm now going to move on to thinking about where you are with your journey and actually where to begin with decolonising your curriculum. This should be seen as a process and a journey. It is not something that you can change overnight. Whilst you will take away things, hopefully, from tonight, you cannot then implement them tomorrow and then embed them immediately. This is a process, and doing small things in your school communities can then help them become sustainable. I would like to then walk through what I think would be a good process to follow when you're thinking about decolonising your curriculum. And I'd like people to think about this in terms of either years or perhaps phases as well. So you'll see on the slides there that they are categorised as year 1, year 2, and year 3. But please think about these as phases, because there may be things that you can implement and embed well within a school year. So the first phase of your journey should be thinking about why it is that you are doing this. You should be reflecting on how you engage with your learners, how you engage with your staff, how you engage with parents, carers, your wider community. Think about the policy that you have in your school and your where you are with your professional learning as well. That can be an individual reflection, it can be a whole staff reflection. And I'd like you to think about where it is that you are with decolonising the curriculum and your professional learning. It's important to scope things, it's important to do research, and it's important to set goals within that first phase and year. When you're then thinking about moving on to phase 2, or perhaps this may be the second year for you, as it may take some time to implement some of these things, you should be asking yourself how it is that you're going to do this. This is when you look at your goals that you've set from year one or phase one, and you should prioritize these. You can then begin to action these, and you can begin to implement as well. When you then move on to year three or phase three, this is more of a reflection phase. This is when you think about what has been successful so far on your journey. What could you do differently? Has some of this been sustainable? Can you make it even more sustainable? How are you going to assess this? How are you going to reflect on this? And how can you actually measure the impact of the things that you have implemented? So these are the 3 stages that we recommend when you are beginning your process of decolonising the curriculum. So let's think about phase 1 and year 1 and what you think about in terms of why we are doing this. This phase will actually involve a reflection of who is in your school. Now that will be your learners, it will be your staff as well. And think about their lived experiences. Think about what your learners have experienced in their lives, what your staff have experienced within their lives, and then also think about position and status of these people who are in leadership positions, who are in supporting positions, what learners are doing with their position, with their learner voice, etc. And then also a reflection of how you engage with your learners, your staff, and your parents and carers. How do you connect through the curriculum? How do you connect with wider families? And what safe spaces are available for families to discuss really important matters? So this process is very, very reflective, and it's about being honest as well. You should also have a reflection of your current policies in school. So think about your behaviour policy, your anti-bullying policy, your inclusion and diversity policy. Most school improvement plans will have some form of inclusion and diversity on them, but you have to think about how broken down it is. Is it really specific? Do you have a clear anti-racism policy in your school? And is it connected with your inclusion and diversity policy? And what does that actually look like in practice? Is it clear to your staff? And is it clear to your learners as well? You should also have a think about what data could help you. So think about this in terms of both achievement and attainment. Avoid only looking at your exam results and look at other wider issues in your school and in your community. This can include things like attendance, it can include bullying incidents, and have a think about how these are recorded. Are they recorded through a certain system in your school? Are they reported specifically to a member of staff? And how these are dealt with as well. And think about how these are broken down in terms of the data. Also have a look at your school demographic. Think about who it is that's in your wider community, what's available in your wider community. And when you are looking at this data, are you looking at the decile areas as well? And when you're looking at these areas, do you then break that down further? Do you look at decile 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then do you break that down into further categories, such as in these categories, which learners have an additional support need? And then do you break that down even further to look at ethnicity? Do you look at gender as well? And if you look at these things more specifically, it will help you understand your school demographic more, and it will help you think about why it is that you're doing what you're doing and how it is that you can support the learners that are in your school community. Year 1 will also involve a reflection of your curriculum as well. So think about what is included in your curriculum, what resources and materials you are using, what assessments you are doing, and what is it that's missing as well. Year 1 is obviously incredibly important, or phase 1, as we've also said. And part of this process means that all of the stakeholders, so all of your learners, all of your staff, your parents, carers, other people in your wider community, you are all co-constructing a vision together of what it is that you would like to achieve and how best it is that you can support your learners. We're now going to think a little bit more about racial literacy and also professional learning. And a lot of the time, people are terrified of saying the wrong thing. Terminology in modern society can change really, really quickly. But as part of this journey that you are on, it is important to develop your emotional and your racial literacy across your staff and your learners. And then that can go further into your parents and carers and also into your wider community. That part of this process is about being comfortable challenging certain discussion points and certain opinions. And part of this journey is obviously thinking about how you can best help learners understand certain terminology and how best they can engage in certain conversations that may be a little bit more complex and maybe a little bit more challenging as well. Think about it as this process and this journey. Sometimes when you are so well versed in a certain field, you will know what the expectations are. You will be comfortable with its delivery and how to engage with it. And when you try something new, sometimes that can be quite daunting and you're unaware of how things are going to go and you're not quite sure what the expectations are. But the more that you get involved in this, the more you talk about it, the more that you research it, the more comfortable you will become and the more knowledgeable you will become. And this is why we would like to stress that this is a process and it is a journey. It's not something that you're going to get right tomorrow or next week. It's something that will take you on a journey and will make your learning environments more inclusive for everybody involved. We also want to change our mindset when we're thinking about this. Try not be too scared, try not be too daunted about it. There will be staff members that are unsure about the delivery of this. There will be learners who feel that way, and there will also be parents and carers that feel that way as well. So think about asking this question: how can I learn, understand, and comprehend this and change this to what is the world asking of me? And that can really, really help. It is important to assess where you are on your racial literacy journey, but it's not just about creating one document or one policy. It's all these little changes and little steps that you can do in the wider process. It's also about school staff and learners having a deeper knowledge of what racism and anti-racism is. And this is what we mean by racial literacy. It's not just one document that has definitions or terminology. It's about knowing more about colonialism, knowing more about the past events and how we see that, how we view that, how that is perceived. So thinking about that as well, and not just that it's one document that's written to change people's opinions. It's about staff having a greater understanding of theories, concepts, and it's about having more inclusive processes and structures within your school and your wider community. It's also thinking about the internal and external factors that will affect your school and the school's community. So things that you can control perhaps inside the school building to then things that are happening out with the school building. It's also thinking about how you can increase the confidence of everybody that's involved in implementing action and getting everybody to buy into this concept and thinking about that this isn't just something that you're going to do for a few months, that this is something that you are going to embed within your school curriculum, within your school community and in your wider community as well. It's about developing a language that's understood by all stakeholders as well. Getting every stakeholder to understand that you will have inclusive practices in your school and your wider community. And it's also about making that sustainable as well. So what we are now going to think about is a little reflection point here. Whilst this is a very sensitive topic and it is a very complex topic as well, we do have a responsibility to be discussing this, and we do want to think about making our learning environments more inclusive for all of our learners. So as part of this presentation, we are going to go through some reflection points, and I would like you to think about your honest answers when you are reading the statements or questions on the next slide. So the first reflection point I would like you to think about is, can you explain the difference between interpersonal racism and structural racism? The second point I would like you to reflect on is, if you have witnessed a racial incident in your school community, And if you've ever been unsure of how to deal with that, or perhaps you have heard about another staff member dealing with an incident and how they were unsure of how to deal with that. Have you ever thought, or have you ever heard this phrase of, I teach, whatever subject it is, how am I supposed to include lessons on racism within this subject? Has your school ever been involved in events that have promoted anti-racist education? The next reflection point I'd like you to think about is, if you have ever taught lessons on racism and or anti-racism, have you focused on things like emancipation, struggles, the story through a white lens rather than lived experiences, or perhaps a text that celebrates culture? The next reflection point is, and sometimes this can be quite a difficult one to think about, have you looked at your teacher staff at perhaps your last school meeting and thought the majority of people there are white? And then the last statement I would like you to think about is, do you think that there are other members of your staff that would share the same responses as you to any of these reflection points? And I'll just give you a little minute before we move on. Now, I would like to stress that whilst those reflection points can be quite challenging to think about, and some of these points actually can be quite divisive, the process of decolonising your curriculum and embedding diversity and inclusion within your school and within your school community, as well as creating a very safe learning environment for everybody, it should not be seen in a negative light. This isn't a time for us to look on this with negative views. This is about us being honest and thinking about, how can we change this? How can we make things better for everybody involved? We also want to think about the role of education, and we want to think about that within social justice, and we want to think about celebrating the individual as well. We also want to think about world-centred education, but also how we can put our learners at the centre of it as well. Now, what we're now going to do is we're going to have a look at some of these reflection points, and I'm going to just talk a little bit more about them and thinking about where you are on your decolonising journey and how you can perhaps begin this process. And perhaps these are some of the things that you can begin to implement when you leave this session tonight. So the first reflection point that we were thinking about was the definitions of things like internalised racism, interpersonal racism, structural racism. And it's completely fine if you were a bit unsure about the differences between them. And thinking about, if a learner was to ask you what the difference would be, what would your response be? Would you be able to answer that question? Or would you have to say, I'm actually not quite sure, but I will get back to you on that? And that's actually okay as well. We are thinking about how we can help our learners understand the impact of these terminology, the terminology that we use, and how this impacts the world. So we also want to think about how we can overcome these situations as well. So here are some definitions to help you, and these might be some of the things that you take away from tonight to begin your process of decolonising the curriculum. The first term that I would like to look at is interpersonal racism, and perhaps try and think about this as a triangle or almost like a flow chart. And we would want all of our learners and our staff to be aware of what each of these things are. So interpersonal racism is the ground level. We're thinking about negative comments, we're thinking about bullying, we're thinking about prejudice, and this can happen between people, it can happen between individuals, and a lot of the time it is obviously because of somebody's ethnicity. Now we're thinking about internalized racism, and that's actually when people begin to when people begin to believe these negative comments and the messages about either their own ethnicity and culture or other people's ethnicity and culture as well. We're then thinking about institutional racism, and I believe that that's probably a term that quite a lot of people know about already. There have obviously been huge investigations in the past about this, so it's a term that a lot of people will be familiar with. And this is when institutions, companies, organisations, they discriminate against people of global majority heritage. And again, we're using this terminology of global majority when we're thinking about looking at statistics, we're thinking about looking at data, and we are looking at moving away from terminology such as ethnic minority and minority ethnic as well. We're then thinking about the term structural racism. So that's probably at the top, or if we're looking at it in this triangle, it would be the biggest part. And this is when the systems and beliefs that give the dominant ethnic group more privilege, more resources, more safety, more power, but that is at the expense of others. So it might be that you take this away tonight and that this is something that you perhaps implement when you're at your next staff meeting. It might be something that you think about when you're looking at anti-racism education, when you're teaching a certain piece of literature in the English classroom. You might look at this when you're looking at a specific event that happened in history. We want our learners to become familiar with these terms, and we want our staff to become familiar with these terms. And this is all part of our racial literacy journey as well. I'd like to move on to the second reflection point that we were thinking about, and this is when we were thinking about perhaps a racial incident that had happened in our school, and perhaps we were unsure of how to deal with it, or we witnessed somebody else being unsure of how to deal with it. And I'd like you to think about why that actually was. Was it because people were unsure of what had actually happened? Was terminology used that you were unsure of or other people were unsure of? Do you actually have an anti-racist policy in your school that has clear instructions for staff on how to deal with these instances and how these are actually recorded and then followed up on? When you're thinking about that particular incident, do you know if it was resolved or not? Was it resolved there and then? Was it resolved later? Were you given feedback on that? And then think about, were you actually afraid that somebody was maybe going to say something, or perhaps there was a mistake going to be made, or that you were going to get something wrong in the situation and that you were just unsure of how to deal with it and you didn't have the confidence to deal with it? Perhaps this is the first stage of your journey. If you're unsure of how to deal with a racial incident that happens in your school or in your school community, it's making sure that there are clear policies for you to follow and clear instructions on how to report that, how to deal with it, and also how to follow up on it and how to make sure that it is resolved as well. You also have to make sure that there are transparent, clear leadership roles within the policy as well. So perhaps who you speak to and who you go back to find out how it was resolved as well. This is also really important for learners to know as well. And it's not always clear when you have a little think about it. So it may be that you go away and think about speaking to your school leaders and how you can best implement this within your school to make it very, very clear on how to deal with such incidents that happen. Now, these questions, these reflection points, were getting us to think about how decolonising the curriculum is relevant to subject disciplines and how schools are perhaps involved in promoting anti-racist education or promoting anti-racist events as well. And when we think about how the curriculum is defined, Education Scotland defined the curriculum as the totality of all that is planned for children and young people from early learning and childcare through school and beyond. So it is not just in your subject discipline when we're thinking about the curriculum. We're also thinking about interdisciplinary learning. So we're thinking about all of our subjects. We are thinking about the ethos and life of the school, and we're also thinking about opportunities for personal achievement. Now, that might mean that some of these things in our curriculum are actually learned outside of the classroom, and therefore, when we're educating our learners on diversity and inclusion, it should not only be taught in the classroom, that this should be something that is widely embedded across your school community. So think about ways that you can perhaps include people from a variety of backgrounds and lived experiences in this. And it shouldn't just be tokenistic. It shouldn't only be studied during certain times of the year, such as Black History Month. This should be something that you should embed throughout the entire year, and it should become part and parcel of what you do every single day. When we think about Scottish education, we know that there are a lot of pressure on teachers just now, and that Scottish education itself is at a turning point. We know that we can't do absolutely everything in the school day, and we can be so bound by a system that is so rigid, that the curriculum is very structured, and sometimes we actually only have a little bit of agency over certain parts of it. We can be confined by time as well. And there are a lot of teachers out there who are working minimum time or are actually covering vacant posts within schools, or that we know that are being stretched. When we're thinking about diversity and inclusion, this is not something that should be seen as a burden, and it's not something that is in addition to an already unmanageable workload. When it's embedded properly, then it becomes part of everything that you do. And there will be groundwork to be done. There are no ways of getting around that, but a lot of schools already have the tools there to be able to do this. They have people there that want to do this. They have a need for it in their school community. And therefore, it's about pulling people together and making sure that the work is divided, that it is paced, and that everybody is part of this creation, that it is not just 4 people meeting in a group at lunchtime, that is everybody in your school community, because we want to make sure that every learner that is in our school community is safe and that feels welcome. We are also thinking about how we can include different lived experiences within our lessons. We're thinking about different texts as part of the curriculum as well. So perhaps you're already on that journey as well, but now you want to think about how you can show your commitment out with the classroom. So maybe you're already including some of these things in your lessons, and that's amazing that if you are, and now you're thinking about how you can expand on that. So think about, how are you going to involve the corridor? How are you going to involve your department and other departments? How are you going to include your learners in this process? And how can you actually get your learners leading on some of this as well? What's available to you locally and at national level for you and your learners? What events can they get involved in at a national level and not just within the classroom? And think about how you can include all learners throughout other aspects of the school community and not just within the classroom. How can you include parents and carers in this? And how can you include other institutions as well? This is something that we will touch on a little bit more later on. This is a reflection point that, as I said earlier on, can be quite divisive when we are thinking about our school staff makeup. And I'd like to share with you this statistic from a Scottish government paper. And I'll just read it out to you just now to make it very clear. So it says, in Scotland in 2023, 89% of teachers were recorded as being white Scottish or white other British. White other made up 3% and the global majority made up 2%. Now that is quite an important statistic, and I'd like you to take this away with you tonight and think about this the next time you're at a whole school meeting, a whole school event, or maybe even a different event. Maybe you're doing a CLPL event over the weekend or in the coming weeks, and think about the makeup of the group that is there. And then I want you to think about what our learners see as representation in that sense, and what your staff see as representation as well. Think about the diverse identities, the cultures, the languages that are in your classroom, but what it is that your learners are actually seeing. We're now going to move on and think about more about how we can do these things. So we've thought about these reflection points. Some of them are a bit more complex and challenging than others, but now we're thinking about how we can implement these things as well and what it is that you can achieve. So you may now have a vision in this second phase of what it is that you would like to do and what it is that you'd like to achieve, but you don't quite have the structures to action everything and implement. So think about what it is that you actually have agency over and what it is that you can control, who it is that can help you, and what funding it is that you're going to need as well. Prioritize the goals, make a list of the things that you would like to achieve, but start thinking about what are the ones that we can do first? What are the things that we can make sustainable straight away? What are the things that we can do within the budget that we have just now? Think about dividing up the work as well. It's not just the responsibility of 4 or 5 people. Perhaps this is about thinking about creating a diversity inclusion group, but then having that divided up into subgroups. If you don't have that already in your school, you can create one. Think about a group focusing on things like the anti-bullying policy. Perhaps you'll have somebody looking at a glossary to help for people who are looking at developing their racial literacy. Think about a group looking at LGBTQ plus representation. Think about a subgroup having a look at attendance. Maybe you have a subgroup looking at ESN initiatives as well. So all of this together is about embracing diversity and inclusion and linking all of these things together to push things forward with your curriculum. Agree on a timeline. We know that that can be difficult, but if you agree on a timeline, agree at meeting points and how you're going to measure that success, then that's going to be really, really helpful to help you prioritize your goals and when you can achieve them. Think about what work can be set aside on inset days. Think about if you do have to meet up at lunchtime, or if you can get time on your timetable to meet up with your groups as well. Work with your senior leaders on this. This isn't something that's in addition to your workload. This is something that has to be done within your school. It is about diversity. It is about inclusion. It is on your school improvement plan, but now it needs to be embedded. So work with your senior leaders on how you can achieve these goals. Think about how you could write a letter to encourage your parents and carers to be involved in this, to show your commitment to what anti-racist education is in your school and your community. Involve them all in this process. Perhaps you could host an evening for your stakeholders to think about how they can discuss their shared lived experiences, get to know one another. Maybe this can be a safe place for people. Think about the representation in your school. Is this something that you can implement quite early on in your process? Is it about looking at the images that are on your website, the resources that you've got, the accents learners are exposed to, the displays that you've got in your school? How can learners be involved in that? How can you get the learners leading on things like that? Can you create a little subgroup of diversity display detectives? Can they go around and have a look at the representation across the school for you? And can they also get involved in representation in things like the school library? Can you create a phonetic register of all learners' names? This is one that I think is incredibly important. And we all know that sometimes when we're put in front of a class of learners that we don't know them well, perhaps we're covering another class, and one of the first things that we have to do is read out a register of names. And some of those learners we don't know, and we do not know how to pronounce their names. How can we make them feel seen? How can we make them feel heard? How can we make them feel included in this? Perhaps there's a way that you can get each learner to record how to pronounce their name and make that available for all school staff. This is something that is hugely important. Perhaps there is some learners in your school that would not be able to do that, so you could get another teacher or somebody who is in a supportive position for that learner to help record the pronunciation of their name. That's the first thing that a lot of learners are greeted with at every lesson, is the pronunciation of their name. How do we make them feel seen, heard, and welcomed in our learning environments? Perhaps you can work alongside your feeder primary schools. Can this process be started in primary school? Think about how you can introduce the ideas of kindness, respect, and acceptance. Can learners who are then thinking about moving into secondary school, can they start looking at the idea of privilege and responsibility as well? Build connections and partnerships with places like your local church, the local mosque or synagogue. How can they support you in this process? It's not just the leaders in your school that can support you. It's not just the staff in your corridor. It's all of these outside organisations, institutions that can also support you in this process. And then have a look at your curriculum. This is obviously one of the most important points. Think about what you can control within your curriculum. Think about what teaching practices you use and who has the power in your classroom. Who is asking the questions and what materials is it that you're using? Is it the same textbook that you've been using for the last 5 years? Is it something that you can introduce that's brand new that is going to require a little bit of groundwork? But once that's embedded, you can use that again and again, and it can open up a whole variety of fruitful conversations for your learners. Think about when you're using specific resources, why it is that you've picked that resource. Is it because of time management? Is it because you're comfortable with that resource? How can you make it different to make it more inclusive for all learners? And be honest about that as well. Think about which perspective these resources are from, but which perspective is missing as well. Who does it represent and what images are being used on that resource? How does it link to the demographic of your school? How can the learners in your classroom engage with this particular resource? How does it also link to what they're experiencing today in society? And who does it impact as well? And a really, really important point is to think about resources shouldn't just be tokenistic and they shouldn't just be shoehorned in. You want to think about embedding them and making it part of something that you do every single day. So thinking about who has the power, why you've chosen it, think about perspective, who it represents, what images are being used, and who does it impact as well. And then our final phase and our final year, we're thinking about the success of everything that we have implemented. First thing to do is making sure that diversity and inclusion is on every single meeting agenda, whether that's a departmental meeting, whether it's a whole school meeting. This has to be something that is discussed regularly with all stakeholders. Think about how you're going to assess how you've got on with your journey. Think about, is there another school in your school community or in your council area that is also doing similar work? Can you get time to swap over and come and evaluate what each other are doing, or come and have a look at what other people are doing? Can that be done on an inset day as well? Again, go to your school leaders and work with your school leaders on how you can do that. Do your staff need more training as well? Can you get an outside agency to come in and help with that? Or can you get training from internally? Can you get people who have done a lot of CLPL in this, who have done a lot of training, who can help deliver some of these sessions in your school? And then one of the other important points here is actually share your work and your successes. Things that are going really well, share that. Let your parents and carers know, let your learners know, and have an honest dialogue with everybody involved in this, and be honest about what you could improve on next time or what your next priority actually is. So when we're thinking about everything, and I know that that's quite a lot of information to take in quite a short space of time, we are thinking about your decolonising journey being a process. It involves everybody. It's small steps to help it be embedded. It's not a bolt-on, it's not an addition, it's not a burden, it's not to be seen in a negative way. It's part of what we do every day as educators about making our learning environments safe and welcoming for all of our learners. Some things will go well and some things will take more time and a little bit more work, and that's okay. It's better to have these things that are sustainable rather than it just being something that you do for a few months and then you don't do because you've run out of time and you've got other priorities like parents' evenings and exams and prelims and marking. You want to think about what it is that you can control, and sometimes things will take a full year, sometimes things will take a few months, but it's about making sure that you're constantly doing something, constantly talking about this, and making sure that it's part and parcel of what you do every day. Encourage your learners to be upstanding. You will obviously increase your knowledge throughout this process, but we can't just rely on talking to one another. It's about how you can actively get involved in things and encourage your learners to actively get involved in it. It's not just about them learning about it through a discussion in a classroom. It's about how they can go and challenge things in the wider community and wider society and improve things for other people. Pay attention to what it is that you're doing and what others are doing. always challenge what is not said and think about what could be as well, and what could be spoken about, and how you can make things even better. And then be the social justice warrior as well. Always interrupt what matters and what is important. Thank you.